thank you both for meeting us this morning to talk about your run for Multnomah County Commissioner District Number 3. I think what we should do is just have TJ Noddings, just if you can introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about why you're running and why you think people should vote for you. That'd be great.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you, Helen, Laura, Shane, Julia, for being here today and for inviting me to this process. I really appreciate it. My name is TJ Noddings, and I'm running for County Commissioner District 3, quite frankly, because I'm fed up with the lack of action on our housing crisis. I work as a housing case manager by day for a local nonprofit that supports medically vulnerable houseless folks getting access to supportive services and navigating the housing voucher system, finding them the housing that they'll ultimately move into and hopefully keep. And outside of work, I'm a housing organizer. I knock on doors and I talk to renters and homeowners every day about the problems that they're facing, about the cost of living crisis that we're all in, about the fact that they can't keep up with rent, can't keep up with mortgage payments, can't keep up with the rising cost of utilities like electricity from PGE that's gone up 40% in the last 2 years. And I hear stories of how families are skipping meals, skipping their medical treatment because they need to keep up with rent. And all of these stories horrify me. My friends are low-income renters. I've helped them through eviction court, and I've seen the darkest sides of our housing crisis. And I believe that personally and professionally, I'm about as close as you can get to the problems and solutions of it. I've learned a lot in both aspects of my work about how we really can solve this crisis. And, the county every year puts forth plans with often pretty low goals that we fail to meet. I think this year's been a bit better with the homelessness response action plan. I think there's a lot of things to like in this plan, but I also think it misses the most critical problem with our housing crisis, which is that rent is too high. The cost of housing is too high. And all of our studies show that the cost of housing is the number one indicator of growth in homelessness in a city. So one of the things that I'd like to see as a commissioner is demanding that the state end its restriction on local rent control. I think that is going to be absolutely central to Multnomah County turning around our housing crisis so that people that are in homes can stay in them, can continue to afford them. And for folks that are on housing vouchers, every single one of our dollars can go further to housing people and we can afford to fund more vouchers. I think we absolutely need to pour more investment into housing vouchers because I help people every day that go onto waiting lists that many of them never come off of, even though they're eligible for housing vouchers. So all of these things have spurred my interest in running on a housing first platform. And that's why I'm here today.
Great, thank you very much. And Julia Brim-Edwards, if you can introduce yourself and say why you're running for, I guess, a full term.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. I'm here to ask for the Oregonian's editorial endorsement for a full 4-year term for Multnomah County Commissioner, District 3. When I was here last spring, I said my home community was under great stress, that the city and county leaders were working in silos and that millions of unspent dollars were sitting in the county treasury while there was a crisis on our street. The county was headed in the wrong direction. I said I could help the county by leveraging my skills, expertise, and track record of delivering results to push for urgent action to take on these big challenges. And I got right to work. Here are a few examples of where I pushed for a change pushed and change for a change in direction. For the first time, the county committed to invest upwards to $20 million in a shelter strategy to provide hundreds of new shelter beds, which we know are desperately needed. These shelter beds will provide an opportunity for people to have safety, basic services like bathrooms, showers, supportive services, and like employment, housing navigation, and a path to housing. I also successfully pushed the county to stop rejecting some forms of shelter. We're now funding the future city task sites and partnering with alternative shelter providers like Bobby Lakes, which essentially kept 175 alternative shelter beds open. In addition, I was tapped to take the lead to design a much needed 24/7 drop-off sobering center. So we had alternatives to the ER and also to jail. We're going to be presenting our sobering plan this Thursday before the county commission. And we were successfully able to secure $25 million from the legislature for deflection related services like this. With other county commissioners, I also advocated the legislature change the flawed ballot measure 10 to address the deadly crisis of fentanyl on our streets, and they did. In addition, I pushed for us to work with city leaders, and we're committed to implementing and funding a comprehensive homelessness response action plan. I've really been relentless over the last 10 months and pushing for greater accountability and transparency in the county's work. I've done what I pledged to do in my first 10 months. It wasn't a long period, but I think I've been effective in the time that I've been as the county commissioner. And there's a lot more work to be done, whether it's standing up the sobering center, advancing neighborhood safety, or continuing to implement our shelter expansion plan. I'm ready to do it. I'll continue to push for action and results to get my home community back on track. And that's why I'm asking voters to support me for a full 4-year term. And I'd ask for the Oregonians' endorsement as well. And I appreciate the time to come in this morning and make my case. Thank you. And TJ, I want to thank you for the work you do as a housing navigator.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think what we'll do is we'll just kind of bounce back and forth and have each of you go first on alternating questions. So Julia, if you can go first on this, you know, the frustrations that many people feel about Multnomah County aren't, you know, certainly are focused on homelessness, but it extends far beyond that. It's the lack of behavioral health services. It's that the animal services division has for more than 7-8 years been having problems that it can't seem to get a hold on. What is the root of all this? What is the problem? And I guess how would your continued service on the commission change that?
Yeah, so I think my continued service, and this is what I've brought to the county commission, is really a demand that we actually have action plans, that we have measurable goals, that we actually in public meetings talk about the results we're getting. And when we've had something, and I'm just going to use the animal services as an example, when there's been 2 damning audits, it basically said the same thing twice, that animals were in the county's care were being poorly served, that the county didn't implement the audit recommendations. So one of the things I've done, and again, I'm going to use animal services as a recommendation, is I have a monthly call with the head of animal services where we walk through their progress on implementing the recommendations of the auditors. And for me, I can take that across a whole series of county services. Right now, the auditor is doing a preschool for all audit. And I view the audits and the recommendations that come up as ways to improve service. They shouldn't necessarily be gotcha audits. They should be audits where we can improve services. And frankly, I think what we had is a lack of action, a lack of accountability. The county didn't set out clear goals for what they wanted to accomplish. And without clear goals and without accountability, you lose trust. And I think there was just multiple instances of the county missing some big mistakes and missteps, and that eroded trust. In addition, they didn't take action against the biggest 3 things that people were concerned about in their neighborhoods and on their streets, which was homelessness, the lack of mental health and drug treatment, and the lack of public safety in some neighborhoods. And when you have a county commission that isn't working with the city to get after the biggest challenges, you do see people losing trust in the credibility and believing that the county was on the wrong track, and frankly, leaving the county. And I've been working to try and regain people's trust by being really clear of what we're trying to do and staying very focused on the issues that I know are most important to people in District 3, who are more impacted probably in this county than individuals who live in the other districts, whether it's homelessness, lack of mental health and drug treatment, or safe neighborhoods. The data shows that District 3 is very heavily impacted. And so I'm committed every day to get after those issues, which I think are the most important ones to the people that I serve as a District 3 commissioner.
Great, thank you. And TJ, same question for you. I guess what would you identify as the central reason for why Multnomah County has been failing on multiple fronts?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most glaring questions I have for the county that there hasn't been transparency around is why we aren't spending the full amount of our supportive housing services funds that we're getting every single year. That tax for Metro is raising more money than ever projected every year. And in the first half of the last fiscal year, we spent less than a quarter of it. And I don't know why that is. I know that services are reaching out for funding opportunities and being told that all the funds have been allocated and that there's no money for them. But I think the county needs to be more transparent about what's going on with our supportive housing services tax, and to make good on Metro's corrective action plan and to have better communication around that. I think when folks think about the problems in the county, most everyday people feel it in their wallet, and they feel it in the choices that they have to make every month to make good on their obligations to pay their rent and be able to afford food. When folks look at houseless people living on the street that are in crisis, that really adds to their view of the county. And I think some of the many problems in our approach towards like the behavioral mental health crisis is that we're not funding enough of our alternative programs like Portland Street Response, which right now is facing possible cuts to its funding, possible scale backs. Things like TriMet's Rider Ambassador program with folks that actually do two-person ride-alongs on our transit systems. I was talking to some of them the other day. They're also facing cuts to their program. And I think these alternatives are the things that get into our low and mid acuity crises, folks that are experiencing that throughout the county, and are able to divert them towards programs that have the most opportunity to put them on a path towards long-term health and stability and get them into things like housing that they're lacking. And housing, stable housing, allows them to be better engaged in continuing mental and behavioral health supportive services with substance use treatment. So I think we really need to focus on our non-punitive alternative programs to reaching out to people. But the number one thing we can do for the stability of the entire county is get more people housed and off the street, and more people that are in housing but at risk of losing it because their wages every year don't keep up with the 10% statewide allowable rent increases that they see. Their wages don't keep up with the massive increases in utilities. Those folks are feeling fear, honestly, that their lives are going to be disrupted, that they're going to have to move out of the county. And I think that's really top of mind for most people living here, most of the working class folks. So I think what they want to see from the county are real, immediate material changes in their everyday lives and the conditions of their lives. So unless we're addressing the cost of living for them, I think they're going to continue to be dissatisfied with the county, and they're going to continue to make really hard choices for themselves and wonder why our local elected leaders aren't doing anything to intervene in that for them.
So just to follow up on that a little bit in terms of cost of living, like what Multnomah County can do to control cost of living. You mentioned earlier just the rent control provision, having local control over what kind of rent control can be. What else, I guess, would you see the county having the authority or seeking the authority for to bring cost of living down?
Yeah, I think one thing we need to do is create an ordinance that considers increases in utility payments as part of our interpretation of the 10% allowable rent control, so that as your utilities go up, your rent has to account for how much utilities have gone up in any rental increases. I also think we need to be looking at more rental assistance programs for folks that are at risk of losing their homes. And we need to pass an eviction representation for all right to counsel program, because that we know in cities like New York, Philadelphia, Boston that have had right to counsel programs, 80% of folks facing eviction have been able to maintain their housing. Multnomah County has the highest eviction filing rate in the entire state, 90% of which is for non-payment of rent, not because they're violating any lease terms, not because they're bad tenants or have any disagreements with their neighbors and the landlord. It's simply because they can't keep up with their rent. And eviction representation often helps reduce the amount of financial burden on these folks. They often win them abatements in back rent. Getting those forgiven can sometimes lead to them having better agreements with their landlords in terms of their owed rent and their monthly rent payments, and keeps them housed. And I think that we've seen alternative programs like Portland's relocation assistance program, which mandates that landlords that force their tenants to involuntarily move for various reasons, one of which could be a 10% increase in their rent, then has to pay the cost of their relocation. That was challenged by real estate big interest groups, and the courts decided that doesn't count as rent control, so the county can implement it. And I think we need to look at more alternative programs like that, that until we get local rent control approved in Multnomah County, allows us to give other incentives and alternatives to folks that are at risk of losing their home to keep them and to keep their costs down.
Are you concerned at all that that would affect, for instance, with there was a study done a couple years ago that looked at the decrease or looked at the change in single-family rentals that were available in Multnomah County, and they found a significant decrease of, gosh, I can't remember. It was a few thousand between 2017 and 2020 after rent relocation requirements went through. Are you concerned that there's going to be an impact to people wanting to rent out to people?
I mean, I think if our concern is that the private equity in the development of housing, like us creating programs that actually serves renters and keeps them housed, is going to scare away private development and private landlords.
These were mom and pop landlords from what the study was.
Okay, I haven't read this study, but I think that no matter what, whether it's small landlords or larger ones, we can't lead with the fear that they're going to move away from their housing stock, because right now we have a housing crisis and there are providers. And the reality is that we need to be centering renters because they're the ones that are losing their housing. The worst thing that happens to a landlord is that they don't make as much money on an investment property. But the worst thing that happens to a renter is that they become houseless, and we already know that our county is not supporting our houseless residents. So I don't really think that that's a significant fear. I mean, housing is an incredibly profitable industry. The fact that we treat it as a commodity, in my opinion, is a mistake, but that's the reality that we're living in now. So that is not a fear that I would lead with as an elected official.
Thank you. And Julia, just to kind of piggyback off of that, is the county doing enough on cost of living? Is it failing to look at policies that could actually bring costs down and help keep more people housed?
I think one of the most significant things the county can do in terms of cost of living is be working with its partners, the city, metro, and the state in production of affordable housing. And looking at ways in which we can partner with the city of how to incentivize affordable housing, just given that's a place in which people spend a majority of their resources is in housing, and that the county doesn't have the direct responsibility, with the exception of in the unincorporated portions. But we do know that as we're moving people off the streets, or we're trying to prevent people from falling into homelessness, that affordable housing is the most important thing that the county can work with its other partners to provide. And I can riff off it that there's the last state legislative session, the county was very supportive of the work, the last two sessions actually, that the legislature did in terms of making investments in infrastructure, but also setting very clear housing production goals, because that is the thing. I think we need about 6,000 more units a year. That's the thing that's going to make probably the biggest difference that the county can, in partnership with the city, metro, and the state, work on.
Thank you. I've already lost track of who went first. So if you don't mind, Julia, if you wouldn't mind going first on this question. What's your opinion of the homelessness response action plan that Chair Vega Peterson recently released? Do you feel that it's achievable, or I guess what are your how would it shape your or what is your view of it? Let's just put it simply.
I'm supportive of it. I believe it's a good first step that we actually have a plan. It's something I talked about last year, that the city's actions were over here, the counties were over here, they weren't coordinated, the funding wasn't coordinated, and the homeless response action plan very much came out of the work sessions that the city council and the county commission jointly held, which is, hadn't happened since 2019. And from that, there was a subgroup put together on the shelter strategy that I served on with Commissioner Stegman, Commissioner Ryan, and Commissioner Rubio, that looked at how can we really beef up this middle piece of the continuum. If we're looking at it, also revealed that there's about 11,000 people on the street. We all knew it was more than that 5,000 to 6,000 that had come out of the point in time count. With 11,000 people in the streets, how do we move them from the streets, people who are unsheltered, into shelter? So there's lots of strategies that are included in the homeless response action plan, and some pretty specific measurable goals. And that's where, like I say, I think it's a good start. Is it always the key is implementation, and that's where the county hasn't necessarily done a good job, or the city, but I think this has the opportunity for success in a number of places, because again, it's the city and the county putting its resources together, agreeing on how we're going to act to move people off the street, how we're going to build this by name list so that we can identify who's sheltered but not yet housed, who's not yet sheltered, what services they need, and how we build a really robust set of supportive services around that, whether it's employment, mental health services, or supportive services. So I think it's a great start. And again, the shelter strategy work group that I was on, the work from that is incorporated into the plan. And I think we need to move forward, fund it, and then I think check and adjust, which we should always do. The county sometimes and the city gets stuck on a path and they don't make adjustments when they should. But we need to, from my perspective, I believe the county should be meeting much more often. We meet twice a week, which is totally inadequate when we have the crises in our community. So we should be having the team that's running the homeless response action plan on a regular basis, presenting both to the city and the county on where we are, what needs to be, what adjustments need to be made, whether we're being successful, whether we need to end doing things, how are we evaluating providers. So again, I think I'm supportive. I think it's a good first step.
Thank you. And TJ, same question for you. What is your opinion of the homelessness response action plan that was released?
Yeah, I mean, similarly, I think the biggest problem is that we just haven't seen follow through from the county in the past. So I think the homelessness response action plan sets out a number of goals that I agree with. A lot of it has to do with increasing capacity of folks that do my job, increasing capacity of our shelter beds. It deals with one thing that I want to see more of, which is funding more vouchers for youth aging out of foster care, vouchers for folks coming out of incarceration, vouchers for folks coming out of medical complexes to get them into housing immediately so they don't just go from these institutions onto the street. But the reality is that those aren't the only populations that need housing vouchers. I mean, basically the majority of our houseless folks living on the street right now, most of them are eligible for housing vouchers, but unable to get them because we don't fund enough of them. They go onto waiting lists that last years and they sometimes never come off of them. So I think in terms of funding for our immediate problem solving, I mean, our county has a 5% vacancy rate of our residential units. And those are units that can be filled today by vouchers like Section 8 or our regional long-term rent assistance vouchers, which have been really popular and successful, but we don't have enough of them. So I think that's a glaring omission from the plan, is what we can do immediately to start moving, again, that 3/4 of our supportive housing services tax funds that aren't being spent, and can lead to immediate improvements in folks' conditions without having to wait the many years over which this plan is allegedly going to be implemented. And I hope it is successfully. I hope its goals are met, because they would improve our conditions and enable us to have a much more successful, robust, coordinated, and cooperative system. We need a lot of fixes. Like HMIS is honestly a terrible system for our providers. It's really hard to navigate. It's hard to make a lot of judgments about folks' needs and how to meet them and what services they're engaged with. So we need to see that overhaul. And it's really difficult to navigate, again, our shelter system. Where are our availabilities? What's the availability in our affordable housing stock? That's many of the things that make my job more complicated, difficult, and slower, because I'm navigating outdated and uncoordinated systems. So I'd love to see those overhauled. But to touch briefly on the affordable housing development question, I've read the housing production strategy, and I think it is unfortunately a rehash of what our housing production strategy has been for decades, which is to give tax abatements to private equity developers in the hope that they'll develop affordable housing. But there's only two groups of people that our current affordable housing incentives target, which is folks at 80% of the area median income, and to a much lesser extent, folks at 60% of the area median income. But a majority of our housing production needs are actually folks making 0 to 50%, which are not touched upon at all, and quite frankly, just aren't going to be developed by private equity. So I think something that we need to invest in starting now at the county is a public housing developer, which a lot of cities similar to Portland have been developing in and funding, so that the city can directly build more publicly owned social housing. That's also an answer to the question of like, if we continue to make policies that center and protect renters, are we going to face backlash from landlords that no longer want to participate in the housing economy here? I think that that's something that we need to prepare for by creating more publicly developed and operated housing stock.
And that actually kind of ties a little bit into the question about the role, whether funds from SHS should be given to Metro to do some of this public housing. Can you talk a little bit about, just your view about that idea?
Is that for me first?
Yeah, sorry.
Great. Yeah. I mean, I would love to hear maybe from Commissioner Brim-Edwards after this, what the stalls have been in the county spending their SHS funds. Because at the moment, I'm running to be a county commissioner. I want access to those SHS funds because I believe that I have a plan to spend them in a way that will make the most immediate and critical improvements in folks' lives that are living on the street. So before I can get behind a plan to have Metro claw back those funds to spend on affordable housing stock, I want to know what the issues are with the county spending it, because that's the reason we're having this conversation. Metro has considered taking the funds back because Multnomah hasn't been performing in spending those funds. And that's been consistent year after year since the tax passed. So I think that that's really the most critical thing that needs to be answered for before we can really decide. But if I was elected to this office, I would certainly make some amendments to the homelessness response action plan for how we could spend those dollars. It would have to do with housing vouchers, with more rental assistance, and funding an eviction representation for all right to counsel program. So I wouldn't support giving the funds back yet, because I think there's still a lot the county can do.
And just to clarify on my part, do you believe that there's certainly there is a need for housing for 0 to 50. Do you think that there's an overall housing shortage in Multnomah
Well,
County, like at all levels?
of course, we know that there is, and our housing
Okay.
needs analysis validates that. But when you look at the housing needs analysis, it also projects a lot of development in housing for folks that are at 120% or higher of our area median income. And as much as that might, meet some of our projected needs for the types of folks that are going to be influxing into Portland over the next 2 decades, that we want to meet people of higher incomes, I think our obligation and responsibility as a county is to first ensure the folks that have the greatest housing need, the highest acuity, and the most detrimental effects to their livelihoods that are met by not having housing available. So even though we have a housing need across the board, the largest unmet need is for low income, especially fixed income folks. I mean, a third of all houseless folks are 55 and older, often living on fixed Social Security income. The fastest growing age group of houselessness is among 65 and older. And if we're not building housing that works for folks on low fixed income, then we're only going to see the houselessness crisis get worse and worse each year.
Great, thank you. Julia, actually, would you mind, I would like to hear, why hasn't the county been able to spend the money that it's received? What is the hang up? What do you?
Yeah, I'll just speak. When I was sworn in on like the first week of June, the county had just passed their budget, and the issue of the unspent dollars was becoming very clear. So there was a tranche of unspent dollars, and then there was a tranche of unanticipated. As you might recall, because it was the first year of the task, people weren't aware of it, and then so there was this second sort of bucket of money that came in, and collectively it was about $100 million. But so when I got on the county commission, the first thing I was like, why aren't we having meetings to talk about how we're going to actually get these funds out into the community, because we know that it's desperately needed. And frankly, the answer I got was, we just went through the budget exercise. People are taking vacations. Like we had there was a super light meeting schedule. It was totally frustrating to me, because I'd just been out talking to people in neighborhoods all across District 3 about the crisis in the streets, and people knew we had the money, and yet the county had just been sitting on it. So that existed. The 100 million came in right as I was there. So the unanticipated was not a function of the county not spending it, but it was just a significant amount of money that came in because people were unaware of the tax and paid it late. The underspend, again, I wasn't on the county then, but my understanding is they were overly ambitious in what they thought they could spend and get out the door. And they did not do that. And this is another type of thing that undermines the credibility of the county to, not spend when people know that the resources there. It's one thing if you don't have the resources, but if the resources there and they're not being applied, and then again, the county kind of going into we're in summer mode, and having meetings that were very unsubstantive. I spent my first 2 months really pushing for that we have public work sessions about how to spend that, that we align it against our priorities, and that we actually have a plan for how to spend it. But I joined my fellow community members with being, super frustrated. They didn't, and TJ, and that didn't get out the door because it's not at all that there was a lack of need.
Great, thank you.
Could I
I'd
ask
like,
a quick
Do
question?
you want me to answer the Metro question?
oh yeah, that's right. Actually, yes, please answer that, and then TJ, if you want to respond, that's fine.
Okay. I would say that Metro didn't make that proposal because necessarily the unspent funds. I think they made the proposal because they did polling and they realized that if they were going to go out for a housing bond, it would be a tax increase. And there's not an appetite right now of people feeling very, this is just another cost of living thing. The taxes for a lot of families are really high, and for individuals. So they were looking at where are their revenue sources, and they've made choices. They decided to put a measure on the ballot for the zoo bond, which I'm all for the zoo, but they chose to use some precious bonding capacity for potentially that could have been used potentially for housing. Having said that, my response when they initially rolled it out was that, it looked like a money grab because they needed money, and it looked like the county had some. And my response was, well, first of all, I thought it was a misstep for them not to have a conversation with us. And I definitely think it's worth a conversation, but most importantly, we need to start with what are the funds that we need in order to address the challenges the voters voted for with the SHS money, which is people living unsheltered and on the streets. And the county has an obligation to lay out exactly what it's going to need over the life of the fund. And if there are resources that are available that could be a revenue stream for affordable housing bonds with Metro, then I think absolutely the county should work with Metro and the state and the city on how to use those resources, which again, we can do a great job at the county and the city of moving people off the street into shelter, but they have to eventually, the goal is for them to be in permanent housing. And so if we can use some of those resources, if there are the resources to do that, then I would say, yes, we absolutely should be having that conversation. And I've already talked to 2 of the Metro council members about how we set up the conversation to make sure that what the county's responsibilities are with those funds are addressed. And then is there the possibility of also a revenue stream for affordable housing, which we absolutely know is needed.
Great, thank you. TJ, did you have a response?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to ask a question of the commissioner. So could you tell us more about what's happened in the year since, that initial budget setting, the summer of slow meetings? Why have we, in all of those months since then, still not improved our spending? There's been recent reporting in the last couple of months of provider networks reaching out to the county for funding and being denied, saying that all the money has been allocated, but it hasn't been spent. So what have those specific issues been in actually achieving our ability to get money out the door?
Yeah, it's my understanding is, well, first of all, the spending usually picks up in the second half of the year. So I'm certainly expect that to happen. And the money has, we were very clear last summer in how we allocated the resources. And some, in some cases, we are contracting with brand new providers, whether it's like take Bybee Lakes or Rose Haven or Blanchet House, the day centers. So when you contract with new providers, there's a whole process apparently that has to be gone through, so that because we need to set up very clear metrics about how the money is going to be spent, what we're expecting to have happen with it. And that contracting process I think took longer than expected. We also had, I will say, in the last 2 to 3 months, we had a presentation on how the contracting process is going to be changed because it's way too long. The fact that we know every day Blanchet House in Rosehaven provides really important day services to people. And the county had never provided support for a variety of ideological reasons. And the fact that it took almost 6 months to get the money out the door, just because they got set up as a new contractor, like, needs to change. And those are the type of things that I will be pushing for. And like I say, I've tried in 10 months to get the county to move faster, to be more responsive, and also to, again, not be sort of, we only can do things one way, or we're going to work with one set of providers. We know that a whole host of housing alternatives and shelter alternatives and day centers need to be supported and funded. I'll also say, I'll speak to just one thing in my district of why it took a long time. So the county 2 years ago funded a safe park village in Montevideo. And despite my repeatedly asking that they work with the community around the siting and have some community engagement about, so that they could be so they can successfully open it and sustain it, it took them a year to actually have their first big community meeting. And we're well on our way to having a good neighbor agreement now, and we've now voted for the funding. But the county has to actually learn new ways of working, because they can't just plop things down in a neighborhood and, like it did with BHRC, and not set it up for success. And I think one of the, hopefully what's happening right now is a new norming, is when the county has a presence or an operations in a neighborhood, it needs to be a good neighbor, because being a good neighbor means that they can sustain the operation. And I believe, and this is true in Montevideo and other places, that people, Portlanders are very empathetic, and they don't think it's humane that people are living in the street with no services. They want to help it, but they also want the county to be respectful of their neighborhood, and whether that's trash, graffiti, like open drug use, all the things that you saw at the Behavioral Health Resource Center. It won't be sustainable for us to operate supports for homeless people if we don't also put in place things that make it livable and for people who live nearby. And so, sometimes it takes time for the big institutions to change, and I've been really pushing for that to happen. I'll also say the other piece is, there was a revolving door at the top of the joint office, and there wasn't any coordination with the city. And both of those things, I believe that Dan Fields has a huge job. I think he's done a pretty decent job of moving a huge system that was very focused on not making a dent in the 5,000, what turns out 11,000 people on the street. And I think he's building the structure and the systems and providing support for providers to actually change the system. So I just think it.
Great, thank you.
I don't want to make excuses for the county, because it needs to move faster, and it's changing the way it works, and that's an important thing, because we're getting better results.
Okay. Thank you. I'd like to move on to behavioral health just a bit. And Julia, if you can go first on this question. Can you tell me what your top priority is in terms of helping plug the many, many gaps in the behavioral health system?
Yeah, so the county is the local mental health provider. And currently, we know that our mental health system and our behavioral health system has been underfunded. There's been at the county a sort of revolving leadership. We have a new health department lead. And we also know that there is a 40% gap in the need for substance use treatment and what's actually available. We also know, I mean, this is like one of the most telling things is that, I don't know if you can see this, but this is like the deaths, fentanyl deaths from 2018 to 23, and we have somebody die of fentanyl death almost every day in Portland. We know that the need is great. If I look at what my priorities are on the, first of all, the resources we have now, we need to braid them into this housing services that we're providing people. Often people who are homeless or unsheltered need mental health services and also drug treatment or withdrawal. And so braiding those together, so it's not people having to go to a variety of windows to get help when we know that they're all intertwined. I'm also going to be, as I said earlier, I'm on the point person for standing up a 24/7 drop-off sobering center, which is really the front door or a first door for those who are in crisis on our streets. And from that, we need to build out the continuum so that we have, when people leave sobering or when they're ready for treatment, that they have access both to withdrawal services and treatment. And currently, all too often, run into people, whether it's somebody's brother, sister, daughter, granddaughter, who's needing treatment, they don't have the ability to access it. So working with the state and the local providers to build out a system in which when people are ready for treatment, they can, and withdrawal services, they can walk in the door. They're not sent to stand outside of Fora or Hooper at 7 o'clock in the morning to try and get in and potentially be told to go away. The other thing that the county can do, and this is very important, an important use of our SHS dollars, is to support sober living or sober houses and recovery housing, because often when somebody leaves treatment successfully, they don't have a place to go. And if they just return to the streets, it's very hard for them to continue in their recovery. Last summer, we put in some recovery housing vouchers and also made an investment in sober living so that, again, we can fill out the continuum. But the most important thing is for us to get that front door of the sobering center stood up and then build out the continuum and fill the gaps. And it's now a priority for the state, and they're going to absolutely have to partner with us.
And assuming this gets the approval of the commission, how soon would we see that?
Ideally, this fall already, we're having discussions about, this is a deflection resource that's contemplated in House Bill 4002, that it could potentially be, say, if law enforcement runs into somebody who is intoxicated and they have potential this new misdemeanor, that instead of being arrested, they have the opportunity to go to sober living, or I'm sorry, go to the sobering center and start the process. I will say I visited, looked for best practices both in San Francisco and Baltimore, and the actual sobering center is not like a high-tech medical facility. It's pretty straightforward. It's a place where people generally is divided in alcohol versus, and then drug sobering is separate because they need to be in separate milieus, but it's not a very sophisticated. Just imagine a large room. In cases for alcohol, it's like bunks laying on or bedding laying on the floor where they sober up, and then after they've sobered up, having access to, peer mentors, food, the whole things that potentially set them up, and hopefully getting them access to withdrawal and treatment. So the short answer to your question is it's possible to set it up by this fall or by the end of the year. It's going to take mostly political will, I believe. Okay. Not that it's a technical, like a hospital you're setting up. So take political will. I know that when I designed this plan, I had individuals like Judge Nan Waller, the Gresham and Portland Police Chief, the head of Fora Health, the CEO of Central City Concern, the head of Adventist Health, that they all know this is a huge need in our community that's been missing since 2019. And that if we wait to stand up the whole system, if we wait to set this up and set the whole system, it'll never happen. This is what happened with the Beacon effort, where they're the whole continuum. So we got to start somewhere, and the sobering center is the place to do it. And again, it's a place to sober and then hopefully get connected to your next step.
TJ, what about you? What would be your biggest priority on the behavioral health front?
Yeah, I'll start with where I agree with the commissioner. I agree that we do need a 24-hour drop-off sobering center. I've read the draft plan. I commend you on the work for it. I think there's a lot also to like in your draft plan for the sobering center. But to Helen's point, I think the weakness of it, and this is, what the public has criticized about it recently, is that it's not going to add beds until next summer is what's projected in the plan. So as the commissioner just described, it wouldn't be that difficult to set up an immediate temporary drop-off center. And I think that's something that we need to pursue. That's not part of the plan. I'd like to see it in its final draft that we pursue opening an immediate drop-off center, because as the commissioner showed in her chart, like, we are seeing fentanyl deaths every single day, and we can't wait until next summer to have the first 15 beds become available. I think that the repeal of Measure 110 was a disastrous decision. I think that we've seen criminalization of drug use fail every single year for decades. It's continued to fail among all of our neighboring states that never had decriminalization. And I think what we know is that Measure 110 failed because we didn't actually provide the behavioral health support that was needed to make it a success. And rather than actually invest in those funds, we've repealed it. And I think we're going to see a lot more people be traumatized by their interactions with the police. And until we have a diversion center like the sobering center, we're going to see them go to jail. We're going to see them incarcerated. And they're going to have even less likely a chance to engage long-term in supportive services and addiction services and get into housing. So I think we need immediate diversion opportunities, not a year from now, but next week, really. And I think we need to invest in our alternative response groups like Portland Street Response and TriMet's Rider Ambassador program. I think we need more behavioral health specialists. We need to incentivize folks going and getting their certification and degrees and operating in the city. We need to address the turnover rate. We're not supplying enough support to folks that are working in behavioral health. And we need more beds immediately, as soon as possible, in our centers that do exist, and to open more of them. And I think that's where, some of the things I like in the homelessness response action plan are funding that goes towards those things. And I want to see them implemented as soon as possible. Yeah.
Great.
Just one thing, I think it's not contradicting, but just to let you know that the county did fund 8 to 9 sobering beds, both at Providence and Unity, and those will all be open this summer, and those are for very acute. So there is right now a place that is the hospitals in Unity would say, they're 24/7 that you can drop somebody off who is acutely intoxicated. And I would just say it's not as easy as just like laying out some beds. I mean, you have to have qualified personnel who are staffing it. Where, for example, you walk into the Baltimore facility, somebody gets a health assessment, their vitals, to make sure that, yes, you're here, sobering is the right thing, versus you need to go to an ER because you're actually having a medical emergency, or you have a serious health condition. And then the sort of, there's always a time during the sobering where people are monitored. So it's not just, we can just, this is one of the reasons why Cooper actually shut in 2019, is the polysubstance use and the meth use, frankly, made it way more complicated than just people like sleeping off a bed drunk. So I think it's important that we set it up for success, and that is gonna require a sort of taking the time to stand it up. And it's been 4 years since it closed. And we just got the resources. I think we're going to move with deliberate speed. And in the meantime, we have those 16 beds from Providence and Unity.
Great, thank you. We are quickly running out of time. So let me just jump ahead to this one question. And let's see, I think TJ, maybe you go first on this. There's been a lot of discussion about the tax burden in Multnomah County. And particularly, some of the taxes are going to hit those who are making 125,000 or above, or 200,000 for couples. But how big or small a concern should this be? Like, would you recommend or support making any changes to any the Multnomah County Preschool for All tax or anything along those lines?
Sure. I've been talking to teachers in the teachers union recently about the Preschool for All program. I was the first candidate running to sign their pledge to fully fund the Preschool for All universal preschool program, because I know right now the county is considering delaying the tax implementation for a year, even though voters overwhelmingly approved the existing tax plan to fully fund it. And that's currently a threat of being delayed by a year, maybe longer. So no, I wouldn't make changes to the program that was approved by voters by 2/3, 2-1. And in terms of the tax burden in general, I mean, again, the complaints that we're getting about tax burden are largely among higher income folks that don't have the same housing threat and cost of living concerns that folks below them do. We're getting a lot of complaints about tax burden from businesses and landlords, real estate, and that's not something that I would center in my campaign. I mean, as a working class renter, my concerns are the folks that don't have enough money to even stay in their homes, get the food that they need each week, that are on public benefits. And those are the folks that I think need the most immediate and acute attention from the county. And, there's plenty of ways for us to continue to shift some of the tax burden to even higher income brackets. I am in support of any tax like the one that Seattle is pursuing right now to fund their public housing developer, which is a program I think we should consider here in Portland, which is an income tax on employees making at least $1 million a year, to tax the money that they make above that $1 million salary, and to tax businesses that are making, over $5 million in revenue a year. So when it comes to my approach to taxes, I mean, to be completely honest, I'm a socialist, and I am quite proud of our ability to collect tax funds and pour them into programs to help the people at the lowest of our economic groups and are in the highest need. I think that's the way the county should function. Our responsibility is to all of our residents, and we need to be looking at the programs that uplift the bottom for everyone in our county. And I think that has to do with being able to secure safe, stable housing for everyone and ensure that everyone has their basic needs met. So when it comes to considering taxes, that's what's in mind for me.
And one of the things that you'd mentioned before is people on fixed incomes, and they are seeing their property and taxes increase. And so, setting aside like the preschool for all or metro tax, there's any number of bonds and levies that are increasing the tax burden on homeowners and renters, because that is passed on through property taxes. Is there any kind of I guess action that you would want to take or on that front?
Yeah, I'll say when I think about things like when I think about relieving aspects of the tax burden, I'm thinking about renters and homeowners. What are tax abatements that we can give and tax credits that will allow people that currently can't afford their housing to stay in it longer? So when I'm thinking about ways that we can relieve the tax burden, it's not to reduce the taxes that are on folks making above 120,000 or 200,000 for couples, or on our businesses or on our property owners that are working as landlords to rent out their properties. It's on folks that currently don't have enough money to make ends meet and then are also paying taxes to the county. So if there's any tax burden to be shifted, and I think that's one of the creative ways that in the absence of local rent control that we can help renters stay housed, is by creating tax abatements for them so that there is a little bit more money left for them every year to go towards their rent. And yeah, that's exactly the way that I would think about shifting the tax burden, is how do we take some of it off of the lowest income folks and folks that are having trouble staying in their housing, and shift more of it to the folks that have such runaway profit and revenue. I mean, we've seen some of the highest growth and profit in this country over the last 2 years. And at the same time, half of all renters in the country, and this is also true in District 3, are paying more than they can afford in rent. They're cost burdened. A quarter of them are severely cost burdened, paying more than half of their income to rent. And I think those are the folks that need to be the focus of any of our tax abatement programs.
Great, thank you. And Julia, same question for you. What, if anything, would you do regarding the tax burden in Multnomah County?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should be concerned when you have a declining population, which Multnomah County has. That means that there's frankly fewer resources for our public services often. And I think, you know, when I look at say, let's take property taxes, actually renters do pay property taxes through their rent because that's incorporated. It's not just the cost of the building, it's insurance and rent, and it's the revolving people, you know, renters, so that there is a cost to renters when you have high property taxes. And I think Multnomah County does need to be concerned because frankly, it's pretty easy to just move to Washington County, to move to Clackamas County, move across the river to Vancouver. And frankly, in all those counties, you might actually feel like you're getting better services. So yeah, I'm concerned about the people leaving the county and the tax burden. And I'll say in District 3, we have, it's amazing. We have all these small local business districts, whether it's Foster Powell, 82nd, Hawthorne, Belmont, Gateway, Division, Midway, a lot of them like small local immigrant owned businesses. And they feel the burden of all the different ways in which they pay taxes and fees, and they're supporting their families. They're not what we consider as the sort of high income people. And frankly, if you look at the charts, it looks like we're losing those high income people, a lot of those high income people in Multnomah County anyway, or we potentially are, if you just look at the income charts from Preschool for All. So I do think we need to be concerned about it because those people pay for important public services. I also say, just in context of Preschool for All, you know, that it wasn't indexed, and frankly, it's just a good tax practice to index things so that you don't actually end up taxing people in brackets that they only got in a higher bracket because of inflation, which has been high recently. I also think that there's an obligation that if we're taxing individuals for something, that we better deliver this service. And that actually for Preschool for All is an open question of, there's not been very many slots created. And frankly, a lot of them are conversions of existing slots, and there's a pretty big sum of money. And so is that the best use of that tax money to go to that? Which I think is a bigger conversation that needs to happen among elected leaders in our community, is when we have some bonding authority that people have said, we're willing to pay higher property tax. Are we going to use that bonding authority for the zoo? Or are we going to use it for affordable housing? Or are we going to use it maybe in this case for preschool facilities? I mean, I think that's the conversation we need to have, because if just continuing to layer it on, it does. There's a trickle down of taxes and the impacts on that. If a small local business has to pay more taxes, they generally don't have the option of continue to subsidize that. They have to raise their prices, which has an impact on community members. So I think we should be really attentive to what it is, because we do know that it's relatively high.
Great, thank you.
We are time. I think a quick 20 seconds.
Well, actually, what I'm wondering is, because to wrap it up, maybe just give each of you a minute to wrap up, and if you like, you can respond to that. And TJ, do you want to go first on, or actually, I guess you started off. So Julia, do you want to go first on this closing?
Sure. In the last 10 months, I've kept my focus on the biggest challenges facing the county, and we've started the county, I believe, on the road to recovery. And there's a lot more work in front of us. If reelected, I'll be the most senior commissioner of the 4 district commissioners in January. We're obviously going to have a whole new team at the city. More than ever, the county needs effective, results-oriented leadership, which I'm ready to provide. I'll continue to ask the tough questions or use my voice to call out the county when it needs to do better. I'll continue to be committed to action, results, and holding myself and the county accountable. And because of that, that's why I've earned the endorsement of a broad and diverse cross-section of community organizations and leaders, whether it's AFSCME Local 88, which represents most county employees, the Home Building Association of Greater Portland, firefighters, 3 former governors, 2 of them who live in District 3, and residents in neighborhoods all across East Portland. I'm going to bring a proven track record of effective leadership and results to my continued commission service. I've only had 10 months, but I believe I've been an effective voice for East Portland and on the commission. I'm ready to continue the work that's in front of us, and I know there's a lot of it in order for us to get the county back on track, and I'd appreciate the Oregonians' endorsement in my race. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And TJ.
Yeah, I'll start with an addendum to an answer to the last question before closing remarks, which is that I think we have a bit of a false narrative about the flight and loss of funds in our county. The reality is that the Supportive Housing Services Tax and our Green Energy Fund have received over projected amounts of tax funds in the last several years because folks are making more income than we projected when we set these taxes out, and we continue to see that. So I think the wealthy in our county are making more money than we ever imagined, to the point where the county doesn't even know what to do with our extra 100 million Supportive Housing Services tax funds. And I think that that also needs to be a part of our narrative when we're talking about folks complaining about the tax burden in this county, is that the wealthy are getting wealthier and the rest of us are getting pushed further and further into living on the street. So I think that's an important thing to center. But to close, I'm asking for the Oregonians' endorsement, and I'm running for this commissioner seat because I'm angry. And I think a lot of working class folks in this county, in this district, are angry as well. We've seen just not enough movement from the current Board of Commissioners. And, Commissioner Brim-Edwards has had a year in this role. I can't speak to whether or not another 3 years would be different than this past year, but I believe that there's a class divide in our current Board of Commissioners and that we need more working class representation that centers problems that everyday residents of our county are top of mind. And that's the cost of living crisis. I believe that we need to find and demand every way that we can to lower rent and increase people's ability to pay their rent and stay in their homes. We need to provide them eviction representation. We need to build more publicly funded and operated housing so that we can move further and further away from, as we've discussed in this interview process, the dangers of working with private equity-backed housing, the commodification of housing, which works against the interests of the folks living in it. I work as a housing case manager, as a housing organizer. I'll continue to be doing that work no matter what happens in this election. But I have a direct line of sight to the effects, the problems, and the solutions to this housing crisis. And I believe that my voice and my insight could really turn things around in a fast and immediately felt way when it comes to folks' concerns with housing and with our behavioral health crisis. So I'm asking the board to endorse me and for the voters to put someone on the board that represents them, that knows them, that faces the same struggles that they do as a renter, and to champion the improvements that will change their material conditions of their lives in a way that will keep them in the county, that will keep them engaged and improve their opinion of the county by actually delivering on the services that we promise to deliver, and deliver on, the promise of a long-lasting, stable, prosperous, joyful experience as a resident of this county. That's what I'm fighting for, and I hope that that's what voters will enable me to achieve on the board.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you both for taking time to talk with us today. I may have some follow-up questions actually for both of you, and I'll just reach out to you over email or phone. But thank you again. This was a great conversation.
Thank you all. I appreciate it.